So, hi everyone, welcome to the last panel of today. The session doesn't end with it. For people who do not know me, I'm Amrita, and we are having this panel today. It's going to be interactive. I don't think anyone has scripted anything out here. You've not scripted your responses, right? Even if you have. Anyways, so this is on enhancing multi-stakeholderism for the future governance of the internet. When we talk about multi-stakeholderism, this word has come up a lot today during even the inaugural, etc. It is where each of the communities, be it technical communities, civil society, government, academia, private sector, has a say in not only discussing but also implementing, not only in the consultative phase. So that's called multi-stakeholderism. And why we also talk about it is because internet has become all pervasive. It kind of touches on all our lives. So one single person making a decision for all may be tricky or maybe not. I don't know what my panelists have to think about it. So I have on, they are all on my left, Samiran, whom you met in the morning, Samiran Gupta, and then Martin Bottoman, whom you also met in the morning today. And we have Noel, whom you also met, and online we have Devesh Tyagi ji, who also spoke in the inaugural. So you know all the speakers, and I will give each of these speakers 5 minutes to respond to my question. You know I'm hard in driving the time. So my first question to all of you is, from your stakeholder perspective, do you feel it is necessary to enhance multi-stakeholderism for the future of the governance of the internet, and why? You may feel otherwise also, but what is your thought? And I'll start with Samiran, Martin, Noel, then Devesh.
Thank you, Amrita. Since this is the last session, we need to keep this a little interactive. But to your question, to answer your question, do we need to enhance? So let's reverse the position, and let me say that the fact that 5.3 billion people are connected online today, the fact that 800 million plus people in India are connected, is also a result of the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. So there is no other way out. However, there, like any model, there are always challenges, and but in multi-stakeholderism, we have a better chance of finding workable solutions. Now, when you talk about enhancing the multi-stakeholder model, I think it's also there is an opportunity here for new people to come, and many of you in this room, hopefully, after you're done, this 3-day program, you will choose to take time and get into internet governance. And getting in can sometimes be challenging, but the fact is, we need new people to come in and create, talk about, sort of bring fresh blood and fresh energy into some of these conversations. Okay, so enhancing will only come. Any enhancement will only come from the active participation of stakeholders. So I can keep going, but let me stop here. And Martin.
Okay, well, what he said, but I may expand a little bit on that. Amrita mentioned that government, industry, business, and the civil sector are all important in that. And that is because none of them can do it alone. Nothing would be developed without even those profit-driven businesses that put infrastructures in place and offer services that we can use. Well, the government is there to help us ensure that there's guidelines, that there's limits to what we can do in the wrong way. Let's put it in those words. There to stimulate us as well to do the right things and make sure it's not only for the happy few, but for everybody. And this is where civil society comes in as well, where inSIG comes in, where others come in. And last but not least, and not forget the technical community, which was almost forgotten in the Global Digital Compact. But the technical community is crucially important and very committed to make the best possible infrastructure available to us. And the better we express what we need and why we need it, the better they're able to give it to us. One clear example is that after the whole affair with, what's it called, the guy who came with all the data from the Americans. Yeah, Snowden, the Snowden thing. After that, what became an active point of attention at IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, is to make sure that we can be secure with encrypted data, that we can be anonymous in principle, and things like that are taken into account as a crucial measure. So, do I think we need to enhance the multi-stakeholder model? Well, maybe it is already pretty good, but we need to evolve it. We need to move from where we are to make sure it still functions in the future. And an important reason for that is that the stakes have gone up. They've gone up dramatically, and everybody's awake now. Let's make sure that we make the best thing happen together. And also, as David said this morning, multi-stakeholder is at the essence of what we do together, and we're all contributors to that. So let's do it in that way. So I would say evolve rather than enhance. And yes, it's important.
Okay, so I think my response will complement what Martin and Simiran have already said. One of the things that we see now is there's an effort. I think more or less we've kind of agreed already that the multi-stakeholder approach is the way to go when it comes to governing the internet. But there's also a trend towards creating new fora. So there are new issues, so we create new fora. This is if you have been following the discussions around the Global Digital Compact that was just adopted by the UN General Assembly, the early drafts of the compact actually was one of the initiatives that was trying to create more new fora to discuss digital issues and internet governance issues. The the difficulty with having a lot of fora for everything is the participation as well. So each of us would only have limited time, and each of us would only have limited resources to participate, especially for developing countries and the sectors and the communities that are conventionally marginalized but really need to be in the room. Is that it divides the resources, it divides the attention. So one way to enhance the multi-stakeholder approach is to actually strengthen the fora and the venues that already exist. For example, the national IGFs, the regional IGFs. These deserve more resourcing. For instance, for the sectors that can provide resourcing from governments, from private sector, not only in terms of funding support, but also participation. Bringing how do we get the private sector, how do we get governments to bring the issues that concern them in these multi-stakeholder fora so that it can be discussed in a multi-stakeholder way. There are, of course, different avenues for governments, for example, to solicit public input, but they each have their own kind of, I suppose, resource limitations as well. So if we could strengthen what's already there, then I think that's also a way of enhancing the discussion and making the discussions more robust.
Thanks. Deveshji, if you could just add your bit on this.
Yeah. Thanks, madam. Good afternoon, all. I don't have any different views. What my fellow colleagues has just said. And in my view, the enhancing stakeholder multi consultation is essential, and it is for the future of internet governance. We have to take all everybody along. I don't think that any other approach is going to work, since we have to listen to the diverse voices, and these diverse voices will definitely come from the different stakeholders. So in today's world, if you can see that whatever policy government is framing, it is not about only internet governance, it is about other policies as well. Government of India has mandated that all the stakeholders has to be consulted once the draft of the policy is ready. So this clearly indicates that how important the multi-stakeholderism is, and Government of India too has adopted this measure to formulate their plan and policy for future. We all know that internet, it just not a single thing. It has to be various stakeholders who are working to operate the internet. And the impact of internet is such that it affects the total society as a whole. So when we look towards a particular thing that affects the society, I think all the stakeholders which are working for the internet or internet governance, as I can say, should work or should be responsive. Their voices has to be heard, and there has to be incorporated in the policies which we take forward. And what I can see is that it is not only about internet governance, it is everywhere, whatever area a policy is being created, multi-stakeholderism is a must as of now. This is my take.
Thank you so much, Deveshji. I think the panel is pretty unanimous on certain things that in today's activities, not only digital or internet governance, most public policies need the active participation of all stakeholders so that it is more nuanced. Perhaps we may want to evolve the model a bit more, strengthen it, strengthen the existing resources rather than create things. So for few of you who are new to this internet governance, just to give you a background, the Global Digital Compact, which was discussed, is something which the Secretary General's office came up with, and the Tech Envoy's office was created to kind of drive this discussion. Primarily because they also thought that digital needs special attention. So there were various aspects in the Global Digital Compact which was discussed. Even now, there have been new platforms which have been created for AI, etc. It has various parameters. If you ask me per se, the text is not bad. It is developing country friendly. So the only concerns are what is the positioning of the IGF, the sustainability of the IGF, or the question is on the implementation, because now the nation states have adopted in the UNGA, as Noel was mentioning last month. So how would it be implemented? How would nation states adopt it? But the challenge is it was not multi-stakeholder. For example, when government spoke. When others spoke, they were given 2 minutes to speak in those consultations. The room was absolutely empty. The governments were not there. You were cut off. You had to register. If you registered, then you again registered. You had to keep your screen on. And from developing country, keeping your video on for 2 hours is not easy. Many places in very far-flung areas, and you can't keep it on. And if you are off, you are switched off. Moreover, the inputs which went in from the community, we really didn't know how it was used. But to some extent, we know that some of the inputs went. But if it has to be implemented, it needs the buy-in from everyone. The SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, we've not achieved it primarily because there was no buy-in from everyone. So that's why I think it is essential. And that's why why we are talking about multi-stakeholder. While countries, they want to protect nation states, and then that is why they're saying we need to enhance UN, have more multilateral processes, which is where governments decide. It's fair, but where do citizens come in? Who protects their interests? So those also comes in at times. Governments may think it is great, but sometimes it may not be. So those are some questions, and with that I will come to the panelists. When you say you need to strengthen, evolve the multi-stakeholder model, etc., can you cite an example of a multi-stakeholder model in action, in local, regional, or national, or even global, which you think is something worth the above talking?
So, a couple of things over here. Uh, I want to talk about, let's say, firstly, let's also agree that the multi-stakeholder model looks a little different when you go from one place to another. Okay, it may look slightly different in India versus, let's say, Malaysia versus wherever else. Okay, so there might be a classical European view, and I'm looking at Martin over here. But the point is, it could change a little bit. So now in India, many for maybe almost 2 decades now, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, TRAI, when they're framing a new policy or it's under discussion, and this is very specific to telecom, okay, they do a public consultation, okay, and it's an open house model. The policy is available. You go in there. Now, obviously, industry is there, civil society is there, and the same happens in the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, where some regulations, because a lot of the regulations impacted, for example, cable TV associations and operators. I'm just giving some examples of the fact that this is not so alien to our culture, our policymaking culture. It does exist, at least in India, and the fact that it has worked. Now, there will, part of this multi-stakeholderism or the approach, is the fact that not everybody can be absolutely happy with the result. You're going to win some bits, you're not going to win other bits, and that is the consensus model. The challenge is to make sure that whatever is the result in that policymaking process, that the policy can actually be implemented. You also don't want a situation that you've created such a beautiful looking policy that nothing can be done. Okay, so yes, going back to your question, I cited a couple of examples. I think I'm off the hook.
For now, Martin.
It's funny, I thought he would say, I can. That's the global example, and ICANN is truly built. It started with a couple of technicians that worked in the room, but today it's really with all the people who make a business out of it, but also with security experts, with root server operators, and more than 180 governments signed that they would be participating and contributing to the Government Advisory Council on an equal level footing, all together with that one purpose of making the internet work. And it works. So that's the good news. If I go quickly to the basics, the essence of every multi-stakeholder model is that we need to have an objective that we share. Someone was rightly saying it doesn't always look the same. It's maybe not even always all the parties. You don't need everybody all the time in the room to make all decisions that may affect. But you need to have the right people in the room, and the right decisions need to be taken. And a clear example of that is, for me, and it's not European, it's purely Dutch, it's the polder model. We have polders. A polder is a piece of land that's below sea level. And it's dry. And we want to keep it dry. And we want to keep it dry together. Whether you're the teacher or the mayor or the banker or the housewife, doesn't matter. We all care. So that objective is so clear. And that is what you need to identify in whatever multi-stakeholder model you work with. Opportunities to do it even better, sure. But important is that the stakeholders that are around the table are in it with their skin. A modern example is we got in Holland platform internet standards to which government participates, agencies, ministries, business participates, SIDN, the .nl, the M6, the big internet exchange, and others, and technical community. And what they do is they look at the state of adoption of modern internet standards. They discuss it, they say what are the next priorities, what do we need to look at to make the internet more robust in the Netherlands, and then they execute on it. And one of the services of this platform is telling the government at their request every 3 months what the state of modern internet standards is in their websites and their services. A clear example of from polder to that. In the Netherlands, we also want the internet to work and to be able to count on it. It's that simple.
So the Internet Society is part of a community called the Christchurch Call community. The Christchurch Call community is global, and it was set up following the Christchurch Call attacks. So the Christchurch Call attacks were a series of shootings in mosques in Christchurch in New Zealand, and as a result of that, this was instigated by the governments of New Zealand and France, where they built a community of private sector entities, the platforms that we know, big and small, governments, including the government of India, actually, who commit to mitigating the spread of terrorist content online, and to do so in a rights respecting way, and in a way that preserves the open, globally connected, and secure internet. So the Internet Society is part of the advisory committee for the Christchurch Call, and the advisory committee is made up of civil society organizations, as well as technical organizations like the Internet Society. And the advisory committee advises the members of the community. These are governments and private companies, on how um, to ensure rather that the measures that they develop and that they enact when it comes to mitigating or stopping the spread of terrorist content online is indeed respects human rights, and also preserves the internet. So that's one concrete example that I can think of. It's not perfect, so because in many ways the multi-stakeholder approach is also it's also evolving, and it should, and in the process of that evolution and that development, of course, there's a lot of negotiations that happen. These are not negotiations that as you may think of in the UN, but in the case of the Christchurch Call, there is our observation is that stakeholders, your governments we tend to go to our comfort zone. So governments would say, okay, this is our decision, it's final. But then you have to push back, and you have to say why you're pushing back. So it's a constant, how to say, balancing and rebalancing of sorts, and that's something that you should expect in a lot of the multi-stakeholder discussions that are out there. But it's one of the examples that I can think of where it's a government-led and private sector-led initiative, but there's a conscious effort to make sure that the voices of, for example, the minorities. So a lot of the terrorist content that we think about are, targeting minorities. So make sure that those minorities are represented and their voices are heard. in the decision making, is one example of how that multi-stakeholder approach configuration can work in a government-led setting.
Thank you. Deveshji, if you could give some examples which you come across, it could be also from Nixi's perspective on this.
Yeah, sure. I will give from the Nixie perspective only. And you are aware, madam, that primarily Nixie is operating in three major areas. One we call it a .in registry, then IRIN, and then the exchange part. In all the three area of operations, we adopted the multi-stakeholderism consultation. And in say suppose in .in registry, I would like to brief you that there are various stakeholders, like we have law enforcement agencies, we have Ministry of Electronics and IT, we have many other stakeholders associated with this, registrar, registry, and other things. So recently, to fulfill the requirement of law enforcement agencies and with the rising threat, we had decided to go and revise our RAA, we call it Registrar Accrediting Agreement. This we are doing through multi-stakeholder consultation only. We had first called a meeting of all the stakeholders, then we had shared that consultation part, and then revised guidelines has been shared with law enforcement agencies. They had also given their feedback, and now we are on the verge of finalizing that part, that our registrar accreditation agreement. So this approach we had adopted in for the .in registry. For exchange part, we are also planning to increase the footprint across the country. Currently, we are having 77 exchange point in our country. Then we had planned it to expand further. For that also, we had consulted all the ISPs. We had prepared a policy document for expanding the IX points, and we had done the consultation with all the ISP across the country. And then after that, we had created a revised document that has again consulted with few of them or leaders of ISPs. And then it is under consultation with the ministry. And after that, we'll be putting it for approval of board for new IX policy at Nixie. The third part, where we operate, is IRIN. And then in IRIN, we always follow model of open policy meetings, wherein the various stakeholders provide their input, how to take it forward. We are always part of that. Another example which Nixie is associated with, madam, you are also associated with that, is IIGF, where the India Internet Governance Forum. You are aware that we are working in multi-stakeholder model there as well. And all the people like from government, private, civil society, and technical communities are associated with this. We are organizing that IIGF since 2021. And but the type of input we get from there is very commending, and they help us in taking our policies forward. So this multi-stakeholder consultation during IIGF actually helps us to stay aligned with the global standards and practices. And it also gives India a standard internet infrastructure and policy a kicking for the robust, and it makes them robust as well as the forward looking. So these are my inputs, madam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deveshji. I do have a last question for the panel, and I will reverse it from Deveshji and back. But the question, I'll share it with you now, but I will take two questions from the floor first, so that, in case you have the question for you all panelists would be, we've discussed about multi-stakeholderism, and that multi-stakeholderism may vary. It also has challenges. It's not a bed of roses. The question to all of you would be, how do we strengthen it, evolve it, what next can be done? But I'll hold the question. I'll take two questions from the room. Anyone has questions? I can see Hiram and I can see her. So one mic there. We'll take both the questions and then we'll
I think, yeah, so whenever we talk about multi-stakeholderism, one group which kind of gets left out, or one group which kind of gets a little bit of voice suppressed, is people from the global south and global majority countries. So what do you think are the key bottlenecks to include people in from these part of the world in an inclusive manner, and how can we like solve them? Yeah.
Thanks. Great question. We'll come to it. And the next question to Swati, right? Yeah, Swati. We'll take two questions together.
Hi, thank you for this. So my question is around the connectivity aspect of it, right? So I was just wondering, when we look at connectivity, right, we need a level playing field, and for that there are two things. One is IXP, but sometimes the smaller ISPs are not able to join the IX or the internet exchange because of the charges associated with it, and also sometimes the major ISPs use transit route to interconnect between networks rather than go via internet exchanges. And another potential reason could be interconnection charges, though it is not there in India, but is there in a couple of countries within the Asia Pacific region. So just trying to understand your thoughts on how to create a level playing field around this.
Okay, so these are two different questions. Your question is more on the IX, internet, your connectivity charges, interconnectivity charges, and creating a level playing field, which I will pass it on to Deveshji. He would be in a better position, though it's out of syllabus for this session, but that's there. And then we have another question, which is how we can have more global South voices coming in. Perhaps I would have some the other panelists coming into this discussion. So the last question first, Deveshji, if you want to share how we can have a level playing field in the IX charges of the small ISPs, bigger ISPs, etc.
First of all, madam, I would like to give the input that we don't consider anything bigger ISP or a smaller ISP. Every ISP is same for us. And the port charges which STPI or Nixie generally takes is very small. It is least across the country. Second thing is that we don't have any interconnected charges as of now. We don't take that. Third thing, that through our the P2P connections, which we are giving free of cost to all ISPs, we are providing a extremely big benefit to them. And this is evident that the maximum number of ISPs are connected with Nixie at present. The government data connectivity or the availability of the government data is also available through Nixie nodes. So this way we help ISPs across the country, and I had not seen any ISP in saying that Nixie charges are more. We are giving everybody same importance. Everybody is given the same type of services, and also the interconnection charges which we bore is not passed on to ISPs.
Thank you so much, Deveshji. To the first question, any of the panelists who would like to
Answer it, but well, would you like to go first? And then, I mean, I can get started. Or okay, all right. No. So I think it's a great question you had, and I, Martin was in fact saying that I've not talked about ICANN so far. So Martin, I will now talk about ICANN. So the reason we at ICANN somewhere 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, we realized that we don't have enough representation across the world. ICANN is a technical organization. There are engineers who are at the core of what ICANN does. Okay, and while this policymaking process was getting more complex, we realized that we needed to have a much more distributed presence across the world for getting more buy-in, because it's a tricky situation. If you don't have enough buy-in, then the multi-stakeholder model is not working. If it's not working, then you're going to revert to a multilateral model. That's the default, right? So I'm sitting here in front of you because ICANN had a policy to create an office in in the APAC region, and we kind of split the APAC region like APAC plus Australasia. So we have colleagues there as well. Now, specific to what have we done to encourage more global South, because the global South conversation is not only about APAC, it's also about Africa and elsewhere. Okay, but I'm responding to you from a APAC perspective. So we, for example, at every ICANN meeting that takes place, there are 3 meetings a year, we usually host something called APAC Space, where and that is supposed to be, and that we create that environment as a safe space for people who may be challenged in expressing themselves in English, for example, who may not have been able to join a lot of ICANN meetings because of connectivity or timing problems, okay? Because we are trying to do the best for the larger audience. So being sensitive about people's needs in this policymaking process is the first step. And this is a conscious decision. We can't just make a call, ask for a call to take place at a certain time, which does not work for the part of the world where, let's say, the internet is consumed more than many other parts. So typically, if we have a policy discussion, it's usually there are 2 calls. One, European time, and parts of America can join, and another is a more Asia-friendly or African-friendly time. We have translation available in the UN languages, So we are always trying to enhance. And even in the past in India, I recall in 2014, community, and in fact it was ISOC Delhi chapter, if I'm not mistaken, they took the initiative of translating some part of ICANN's basic presentation. Okay, what is ICANN? So that was made available in Hindi. Now we are always available or open to some of these collaborations from community to get our messaging across, more easily. Yep.
Okay, so there are certainly several bottlenecks. I think I already mentioned resourcing. Samir mentioned another thing, which is language, and there's also skills. Um, uh, it's it's not. We tend to think that just because people can, they will. So there's also how do you actually participate? What are the processes that are in place? What are the processes that you need to know? What are the protocols, even though we don't like to call it that way? From the Internet Society, one way we try to address this within our capacity is through capacity building. So I don't know if I'm using the right phrase, positive discrimination, where you put more emphasis on the communities and the sectors that wouldn't normally have this opportunity to participate in the discussions. So that's one. Another would be just to stress the importance of local internet governance fora, and making sure that, because these can be tailored very much to the local issues, etc. Making sure that the participation is robust locally, and also making sure that the outcome of those discussions feed into the bigger discussions.
Yeah, no, thank you for talking about ICANN, and thank you for talking about capacity building. It's all of that, right? One of the things that changed dramatically through COVID, but was already possible beforehand, you could also contribute via online participation. Now we call it hybrid, and it's really sometimes quite effective depending on who organizes it and what the objective of the meeting is. So whatever you do, and everybody here in the room that has gotten even more of an appetite for internet governance, go for it. Go look for the websites, look for the meetings, and if they're of your interest, go engage. That's an important first step, because ultimately you'll grow into participating, and Amitabh here in the front is one of our upcoming board members. They come from everywhere, really. Some of them come really from the whole way up from being trained in youth education forums, and all the time in the board. There's a couple of examples. Leon Sanchez from Mexico, he started as a fellow. And so everything is possible when you go for it, when you put your effort to it. If you would have been here yesterday, and some of you were, and some of you were not in the room of Youth IGF, but in the other room, where the Global Forum for Cyber Expertise is a collaboration of about 200 global parties, partly countries, partly global players, that is actually reaching out, in particular to those countries that are ready to further develop their participation, and to train them, to make them aware of the issues, and have them step up in that way. Global Forum for Cyber Expertise isn't the only one, but it is funded and sponsored by those parties that are actually thinking it's important. And one of the founding countries is India. So I see there's a lot going on. More needs to be done. Hybrid is the thing. And last but not least, new people are important. And if you're not in yet, please make sure we see each other more often.
Are there any other questions? We take last questions. Yeah. So, no, you can ask a question. If anyone has a question, last chance.
Yeah, very small. You can answer it very. Hey, my name is Shivakumar Dakshinamurthy. My quick question is: see, when you talk about multi-hurdleism, is good concept because you are going to get a diverse feedback. Obviously, different views will be there. But how are you going to get a consensus from all of them? Are you going to take it generally at the majority level? You take a decision. Are you trying to convince everybody get 100%? Then you are going to take a okay for it. I just wanted to know. Maybe the short answer still is fine.
So I will reframe it as the panelists earlier said, multi-stakeholderism has different flavors, different places it works in different ways. There's no clear-cut thing. In your parting responses, if you could also elucidate, how decision makings in different platforms happen in multi-stakeholderism. Is it consultative? It is what, as in, you did allude to it, all of you, but if you could just elucidate to you in your parting sentence, and also respond that can we further strengthen this model and how should we do so. And just to add, for some people, there was the Net Mundial plus 10 discussions earlier this year in April. If you go and see the document which came out of it, there is a part which talks about how multi-stakeholder, multilateral can work together, how the multilateral processes can learn from multi-stakeholderism. It also talks about the concerns which multi-stakeholderism has and how you can enhance it, like Noel mentioned about participation, how you can enhance participation, how you can increase because the learning curve is really high, how you can enhance it, etc. So do look at it. That's very, it's not a perfect model as everyone said, but there are ways to enhance it. So you could look at it, and even the processes of how consensus making can happen is also mentioned there. But I will pass it on. I'm the moderator. I will not speak, though I spoke a lot. I'll pass it on to Deveshji first, then Noel, Martin, and then Samiran.
Here, I would like to give example of policy development process which is adopted at APNIC. Generally, what happens during that, the proposal comes, and then proposal is circulated on the email list, and the inputs from various stakeholders is taken. And generally, the discussion happens there, and after that, it is presented in one of the APNIC meeting, wherein the consensus is made. In case consensus is made, that particular proposal is adopted. Otherwise, it is dropped. So there is what I can say, it is different stages on which a proposal is taken up, and refinements keep taking on. Also, in the APNIC process, in case some suggestions are there, it is suggested that the proposal may be reworked, and after incorporating the suggestions, it may be retaken to the APNIC this thing. So generally, I believe that consensus is the only mode through which we take the proposals forward. Thank you.
So, in terms of consensus building, somebody told me recently that it's a good way to know whether you reach consensus is if you're equally unhappy with the with the outcome. So, with equal amount of unhappiness. But one example of kind of getting consensus in, for example, the technical community, which in a way it's also multi-stakeholder, because this is in the Internet Engineering Task Force, where anyone can propose standards as long as you know how to write an RFC. But these are academics, these are people who work in the private sector, these are individual experts and engineers, and even people who work for government in standards development in government. But it's a facet of a multi-stakeholder approach that happens in the technical community. So anyone can submit an RFC. That RFC gets gets discussed in mailing lists mostly, and then the Internet Engineering Task Force, they meet thrice a year, and they reach a consensus by humming. So they hum, and the loud. Well, if there's a loud hum, then it means you've reached consensus. That doesn't mean that everyone actually hummed, and there is no standard for the level of decibels that you have to reach for there to be consensus. But it's an indication, but it doesn't stop there, because even if you get the loudest hum, and you finally have protocol, the adoption of a standard is not mandatory. So that you have consensus, the absolute consensus, when actually people have adopted your decision.
Not necessarily yes, no, but it can be humming, right? Somebody can make it.
So I will allow them to speak from others. So Martin,
I thought I was lost. Aye. Good. Well, for your question, different it depends really where the multi-stakeholder model is contributing to. And the humming was mentioned. In ICANN, the highest body is the community. The community makes the policies, and the board sort of steps in with taking the fiduciary responsibility. Are they legal? Are they reasonable? And from that perspective, we say yes or no or send them back. If the board doesn't behave, the empowered community sends us home. Hasn't happened yet, because people on the board also really care and they really listen. And what happens is that sometimes we engage with the community like, do you really mean that because? And then you get communication. So that is a forward, an example. For strengthening the model, I think the most key element is first to make sure that you continue to evolve and don't hold on to what used to be. This also means there needs to be newcomers coming in all the time, not only in the community but also in leadership positions, because the world changes fast. And we know how it used to be, but we don't know how it's going to become. we're creating it together. And it's very important to have new regions, new sectors, but also young people come in more and more. I dare say, and it's not a formal ICANN opinion, but it's my opinion, we should have more people under 50, 40, maybe even 30 on the line, on decision bodies. In industry, they do great sometimes with amazing initiatives, building unicorns and big businesses. In the boardroom, they're still relatively seldom. So, young people, please continue to be there until you're a little bit older. I see one of the young people here who's been on for 7 years, so not as young as 7 years ago, but still in the room. And we'll see more of you too. So, I hope that helps.
So let me put a cap to your question. You've got a lot of ingredients. So I'll talk about, everything that my colleagues on the panel have said. I completely agree with. But let me add one more element to this. It's how you design that debate on policymaking. That design element is very critical. If you get the design wrong, that conversation will go in a certain direction and then it'll just collapse. And we've seen it happen. I mean, at ICANN also. We've had these situations where, we start a conversation, or rather the community starts a conversation, and it suddenly just peters out because the design may not have been robust enough. So it's very important to even to get halfway through to the humming stage, to have a robust design, which takes into account a couple of things. One of them is in the ICANN framework. ICANN's remit is very narrow. It's deep but narrow. So are we within our remit to have this conversation, and in which community group does this conversation fit, and therefore having that conversation, okay? So until we are sure of that, until we are sure of this design. So in fact, I'm plugging some more ICANN now. We have a policy team which actually supports the community, help design these conversations. Because what we also don't want is the community going ahead, having a conversation, and if it doesn't work out, they will feel that they've wasted their time. Okay, so we have a policy team which has economists, which have policy specialists, which helps the community, to create the design. To the last question, which is what needs to be done. I am with Martin on that. We are both gray-haired. We need Martin Botterman. Thank you, sir. We are both aligned. There needs to be newer, both leadership and people coming in. I mean, if you have enough new people in the conversation, then they will percolate to leadership. And we need, the newer community members, wherever you are, to be contributing. It doesn't matter which forum it is. It could be, APNIC, it could be Internet Society, it could be ICANN, but eventually it's the same conversation in different ways that is taking place, and we need new people to come on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Samiran. We have 5 minutes, but there is one person who didn't ask then but wants to ask a question. So I'll give him the chance, and 1 second to all the panelists. Quick, 1 minute question.
Yeah. So we are in a global connected world where information transmits everywhere, right, in space and everything. So there's ICANN, then there's International Court of Justice and Interpol. But what I'm asking is, does internet require its own court, right, that exists outside the jurisdiction of an individual nation? Like, so yeah.
They're asking for internet. Should you have a separate court which actually addresses the issues rather than jurisdictions? Right. That's the question. Which is so. should take
So, the largest number of disputes that come in the internet space is related to copyrights, infringements, domain name. These are all domain name related disputes, and there are global forums. INTA is, one of them, and there are arbitration centers globally. So there is a legal process available for the domain name side of the dispute, and those are multi-billion dollar disputes that could arise. Okay, so that is already in existence. I'm not sure if you're looking at any other kind of disputes that I don't know, but let me stop here.
And the other thing is, many of the manifestations happen in real life. For example, if it is money, cross border jurisdiction with life, an internet thing will not do because it's human beings. So it will go, first of all, the national rules will rule, then will the global things come in, because there is no agreement globally on many things. CSAM, yes, there is agreement, but in other things, a lot of agreements do not happen. You have the cybercrime treaty agreed in UN, but not all countries have ratified it yet. So that's something, we will have to stick to the current norms, but I think panelists may have something more to add.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, I think we discussed this in the morning a little bit. When we were talking about how we look at, let's say, how we look at privacy. So from an ICANN perspective, what we're looking at is how does any new regulation impact our remit, to keep the DNS working. Okay, so if we take that same thought into any kind of dispute situation, the only disputes that come our way, the majority of them are really related to domain names, and that's where our contracted parties become party to it. We are occasionally dragged to court alongside them. Not the number one defendant, but number 15 or number 10. But the fact is, it happens. So there are processes in place to deal with them. But yes, in our policy making, we want to make sure that we are compliant with national level policies. Yeah. Thank you.
A very quick one in between. The oldest policy at ICANN is the UDRP, and that has to do with intellectual property rights, indeed, in domain names. So it's a very active participation.
Yeah. So I struggle to think of what that court would do that isn't already being done by existing law enforcement mechanisms that have cross-border cooperation. For example, when it comes to money laundering or crime, that is something that the Interpol is already very good at. And they have arrangements where you don't, like Amrita said, you don't really need an international court, but there's a coordination happening so that it can happen in one court somewhere in a country that is best placed to I suppose to solve that problem.
Deveshji, do you want to add something to it?
Madam, we have actually created an INDRP. We call it .in dispute registry policy, and it is aligned with the UDRP policy, as Martin has mentioned. And this is working very well. And all the trademark visual disputes which we receive are being solved through this particular resolution process. And our court has also acknowledged the utility of this particular process which we adopted. So I don't think that anything else is required.
Right. Thank you so much, Deveshji and the panelists, for this discussion. If you have questions, please reach out to the panelists later. We have the last session where we will have action time for them. They have to think. So thank you to the panelists.